Are you perhaps feeling a little adventurous? Hey there, it's Teddy coming to you from down in my record room with yet another vinyl orgy. And invited to this orgy are some recent scores. Half of them are new releases from 2018, and the remainder are some vintage pickups along with a reissue. And all of them are highly recommended. I'm really excited about this particular batch. But quickly before I get going, I wanted to mention some of you are aware of the weekly Saturday thing I'm doing over on Instagram, where I show 10 albums that I spun the previous week. I try to do this every Saturday morning. Mostly, it doesn't work out always depending upon what's going on, but I'm doing it, and check it out. It gives you a little insight into the collection that you may not get here, and there's no redundancy. I don't double up. What I show here will not be on Instagram and vice versa. So anyway, head on over to Eat, Sleep, Vinyl on Instagram and check it out. Other than that, let's get to it. Well, first up is Peggy Lee. No, not that Peggy Lee, but this Peggy Lee, the cellist, band leader, and composer from Vancouver. This is her 2018 release on Songlines called Echo Painting, and it's a commissioned suite of music that, dare I say it, is my favorite release this year so far. Peggy Lee put together a 10-piece ensemble of Vancouver locals to help bring her broad musical vision to life. This also includes pedal steel guitar, which I am just absolutely a sucker for in a jazz context. But she says that Carla Bley and Charlie Hayden's Liberation Orchestra served as inspirations for this music and this particular record. And yeah, you can hear those seeds. And man, what a great place to spring forth from. And she just does an incredible job. This, I would say, is inside, outside, done right, and on a very vast musical canvas. I mean, there is a very impressive mix of moods, modes, and melodies that, from song to song, and even within a song structure. I mean, these are very, very well thought out constructions, and she doesn't shy away from some rather delicious melodies, but she also leaves plenty of room for improvisation and heading out to some more outward bound regions. So let me step back so you can hear a little bit of Peggy Lee from Echo Painting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not always the biggest fan of larger ensembles, but this just works. Subversively succulent is how I would sum up this wonderfully diverse album from Peggy Lee called Echo Painting on Songlines from 2018. Well, next up is a 1982 ECM release from the great Steve Reich. It's called Tehillim. And I think this piece is very interesting. I think it seems that it's fallen through the cracks a little bit when compared to his masterpieces, drumming and music for 18 musicians. But I think this one holds up pretty damn well against those. And the interesting thing to me is it feels like an evolution from those pieces. Of course, Reich uses his usual kind of subtly shifting African-inspired percussion, but here there's an emphasis on female voices, and that introduces a real emotional and spiritual context to the music that wasn't quite as evident before. And it seems that he's doing some key modulation here, which I don't believe he was involved in previously to this piece. If I'm wrong, let me know. But that seems a bit different. But Tehillim itself is the Hebrew word for psalms, and so therefore Hebrew psalms are the basis for the voices and the singing. And let me tell you that the singing there is this gorgeous purity of tone, and it kind of reminds me, harkens back to the sound of madrigals. So there's a very, very cool and interesting blend of the historical and the modern going on here. Very, very evocative stuff. Let me step back so you can check out a little bit of Tehillim from the great minimalist Steve Reich. You know, more than anything, there's a joyfulness that exudes from this piece that is just not quite as evident in some of Steve Reich's earlier masterpieces. And for me, that is an evolution of note. Steve Reich's Tehillim on ECM from 1982. So what happens when you reunite a couple of British alumni from the legendary 1960s Spontaneous Music Ensemble? Yeah, well, this happens. And what happens if a couple other elite jazz improvisers join into the mix? Well, yes, this happens. And what happens when the primary artist is also the label owner? Well, this happens, and this happens to be over 2 hours of free improvisation spread out over 3 discs at a very fair price. And this is uncharted territories on the legendary bass player Dave Holland's label Dare 2. It's a 2018 release, and it features Evan Parker on tenor, Craig Taborn on piano, organ, and electronics, and Chess Smith on drums, vibes, and percussion. All leaders in their own right, and an amazing ensemble that was put together. The original intent was just a duet album between Holland and Parker, but the addition of Taborn and Smith just raised the level. Fantastic. What happened here over the course of 2 days of recording is every conceivable combination from quartet, trios, duos. It's all here, spread out. It's great. Now, compositionally, well, there are only 3 compositions. One being a revisit of Dave Holland's Q&A from his classic and legendary Conference with the Birds LP. But all the rest are freely improvised pieces. And generally, it's a laid-back vibe and very earthbound. There is very, very intense listening and interplay happening here. And these folks are definitely not playing independent of one another. There are moments that they rise up with greater intensity, but the intent here is just not to come out and spit fire. It's about the listening. It's about the interplay, and they are just masterful at it. Let's step back for a second. I want to play one of the duet cuts, a sample of the original intent between Dave Holland and Evan Parker, where you can really sense this listening and interplay. You know, there's a very deep musical maturity at play here, and when you listen, you can hear listening between some very gifted musicians, and that is a gift that keeps on giving. Yes, it's uncharted territories from Dave Holland, Evan Parker, Craig Taborn, and Chess Smith on Dave Holland's Dare To record label from 2018. Well, I really have to thank my friend Mike Johnston for refocusing me on an artist and an album that I had on my want list for quite some time, but was always leapfrogged by other things. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. But man, am I glad this has been rectified, as this is an obscure gem that deserves much greater attention. And it's called New Dance. It's from Southern California alto player Anthony Ortega. It's a 1967 release on the Los Angeles-based Revelation label, which there are a few gems housed on that label's discography for sure. But Anthony Ortega, as I said, is an alto player who came up through the bop era and moved into some freer expression during the 1960s, similar to, say, Jackie McLean. But, oh my God, what a tone this guy has. A purity of tone unmatched. I mean, perhaps Paul Desmond, similar in purity. Amazing. He's also a very, very imaginative player. Really like his playing, and he's not aping anyone at all. You know, the fact of the matter is very difficult for Los Angeles-based jazz artists to break through. You know, imagine if the likes of Horace Tapscott or John Carter, Bobby Bradford had been based in New York. They'd be common names we'd be discussing frequently and passionately. And Anthony Ortega is, for me, another one to join that list. On this album, the title cut New Dance is a trio setting that has a similar vibe and feel to me as Ornette Coleman's At the Golden Circle, the two albums that were released on Blue Note, if you're familiar. The rest of the album are some really great brooding duets with the bass player Chuck DeMonico. Chuck DeMonico, incredible player, wound up making his bones as a session musician of choice in the LA area, but oh my God, what a feel he has on here, and what could have been if he had delved further into these musical waters. Amazing. But let me step back for a moment so you can check out a little slice of one of these brilliant duets. Oh yeah, some of that cherished mid-1960s jazz expansion and abstraction. Just love that stuff. And speaking of love, you can still show some love to Mr. Ortega, as he is still gigging at age 90 on Sunday nights at a joint called Mr. Peabody's in Encinitas, California. So if you're around that area, on Sunday, I'd head on down, check him out. Gotta love it. And gotta love New Dance from Anthony Ortega from 1967 on Revelation. So glad to add this to the collection. Well, next up is a newer release from Northern Spy Records. It's Jason Stein's Locksmith Isidore and their release After Caroline. Now Jason Stein is a Chicagoan who I've shown previously, and this is a trio of his that he's had on and off for the past 10-ish years. And as I said, I showed Jason Stein's Delmark release from 2017, and I just think that he's worthy of further discussion. He's just become one of my favorite current improvisers. His solos and improvisational chops are just magnificent, and especially that he's wielding the challenging bass clarinet as his axe. I also dig his willingness to travel as far and wide musically as he does. I would describe Jason Stein as a free neo-bop avant swing balladeer. How about that? I think that just about describes it as well. Now he's joined by his Locksmith Isidore compatriots, Jason Rebka on bass and Mike Pride on drums. And being a trio setting, there is plenty of room to be heard, plenty of room to shine, and indeed they all do. Now you would expect that from a group that has been together for as long as they have. And there is great energy and interplay. There's that word again, interplay, but great energy on this album. But what gets me always is that visceral, woolly mammoth of an instrument, the bass clarinet, and Jason Stein's utter mastery of it. So let me step aside for a second so you can check out a little bit of Locksmith Isidore. yeah, I just dig it. I really dig it. And I get the feeling that somewhere out there, Eric Dolphy is just got a great big smile. Not because Jason Stein is a scanned copy of Dolphy's brilliance, but because he accessed Dolphy's essence and then went out on his own. Yeah. Really cool. Jason Stein's Locksmith Isidore, After Caroline, from 2018 on Northern Spy. As some of you know, I'm a huge fan of Indian classical music, and over time I've been trying to understand the structures at play that are so different from Western music. And I'm beginning to hear differences in how various masters approach the music. And so enter Nikhil Banerjee. He is an absolute master of the sitar who has risen to the top for me. As a matter of fact, I think Fred showed some Banerjee not too long ago, which was a pleasant surprise. But this is a 1969 Capitol release called The Sitar Genius of Nikhil Banerjee. And it is, your typical two side-long ragas, just wonderful. Now, there is no denying Ravi Shankar's mastery of the sitar, along with his importance of being an ambassador of Indian classical music to the Western world. But Nikhil Banerjee, I have found to be a more delicate player, and he resonates deeper with me. I kind of equate the difference between Shankar and Banerjee as the difference between the great tenor giants Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, if you're familiar with that. Now, they actually had the same teacher coming up in India, the legendary Baba Khan. But Khan set the two of them off on different courses, different directions. For me, Ravi Shankar is more outward and muscular, where Nikhil Banerjee has a lighter touch and is seeking more inward. Banerjee uses sliding and bent notes to great effect. He creates this kind of beautiful, soulful environment that is different, that I really, really enjoy. But hey, he can also bring it when called upon. And when he brings it with this exquisite gracefulness. Let me step back for a second so you can you can hear a little bit of Nikhil Banerjee. Bring it. Bring it indeed. I suggest that if you're at all into Indian classical music, that you bring some Nikhil Banerjee into your collection. Yeah. So this is the Sitar Genius of Nikhil Banerjee from 1969 on Capitol Records. Well, next up is a recent release that has severely attached itself under my skin. It's gotten under my skin in a very good way. It's an album called Pillars by Taishan Sori. It's a double album, gatefold from the Firehouse 12 folks. Now, Taishan Sori is a drummer of choice in New York jazz circles, but he is quickly becoming a leader, composer, and conductor of considerable note. This sound universe he's created, Pillars, is very dark, and it's very textural, and it's sounds that linger, and they linger at this intersection, this weighty intersection of drone, of contemporary classical, of jazz. Sori even cites Tibetan rituals as an inspiration for this work as well. But this is a cut down. The double album is a cut down of a nearly 4-hour piece that's comprised of 3 movements. You get the full piece downloadable when you purchase the album, so however you want to engage with it is your choice. But he utilizes an 8-piece ensemble that you can see here that move slowly in and out of various instruments and sound combinations. But Sori is also using silence and space as an integral part of the sound concept that he has developed here. It's a sound language that is rooted in the likes of Roscoe Mitchell and Bill Dixon, Anthony Braxton, and the conduction process of Butch Morris, but it is its own animal, and it is difficult to define. It's kind of like being tossed into the deep end of a pool, blindfolded at 3 a.m. I mean, your first reaction is, where the hell am I? Until you begin to get your bearings and accept the challenge. Let me step back for a moment and give you a sample of Pillars, but it really won't do it justice because it's only just a sliver out of this 4-hour behemoth. But let's give it a shot anyway. Yeah, Taishan Sori is definitely up to something. I mean, he is up to something very unique, very interesting, very challenging. It is going to be quite demanding of your attention, and I believe it's going to garner a bit of attention as well, and I think you're going to find this on a few year-end lists that'll be upcoming. Taishan Sori, Pillars, from Firehouse 12 Records from 2018. Well, next up is a super cool reissue from the drummer Masahiko Toga. Originally released in 1979 on the Paddle Wheel label, a Japanese subsidiary of King Records. This was reissued last year, 2017, by Tiger Bay out of the UK. It's a nice 180 gram, 45 RPM reissue. Very, very well done. But the Japanese drummer and percussionist Masahiko Toga was at the forefront of free jazz in Japan. Now, unfortunately, around 1970, he was involved in an accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. But fortunately, he plowed ahead. He had a drum kit designed and a custom wheelchair made that would allow him to continue on, and he developed this very unique approach to the drums and percussion that I totally dig. Now, as you can imagine, that travel would be a bit of a challenge for Toga, and he did spend most of his time in Japan, and so not as much of a household name as he could be and should be. But in 1979, he did manage to get to Paris, and he had a recording session with the great Don Cherry and the great Charlie Haden. And it is quite something. Now, in 1979, Cherry and Haden had teamed back up for their group Old and New Dreams, so they were definitely in the mode of avant lyricism at that particular time. And they definitely brought that loud and clear into this session, along with this unique approach, as I say, that Toga had to drums and percussion. He had this very propulsive but light touch, and I'm very, very fascinated by it. But yeah, very, very cool stuff. Let me step back for a second so you can hear a little bit of Cherry and Haden that leads into a little bit of a solo section that you can hear more of how Toga approaches things. Yeah, this is definitely a shining example of making the best out of a bad situation. And when you add Don Cherry and Charlie Haden into the mix, that situation gets even better. Now, I'm serious, if you are at all a fan of Don Cherry or Charlie Haden, I highly recommend this album. And the really cool benefit is you'll likely discover an awesome drummer and percussionist, Masahiko Toga, along the way. Song of Soil, originally a 1979 release and re-released last year, 2017, on Tiger Bay. Well, that wraps up this vinyl orgy, and as usual, I want to thank all the subscribers, new and old. Thanks for hanging in there with me. But you know, it's time to go get some records. Go get them and do what you can to keep it in the groove, and I'll see you next time.